Hello and welcome to the Indie Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Mike Bassick. Hey, Mike, how are you doing?
Good, Matty. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, thank you. And to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Mike Bassick is a strategic bookkeeper and business advisor with over 25 years of experience helping entrepreneurs from coffee shops to creatives turn financial chaos into clarity. And we are going to be talking today about the top 5 bookkeeping tips for indie authors. And I really like this because I think that a lot of the conversations about indie authorship, indie publishing, we go right to the indie specific things like what's your ROI on Facebook ads and things like that. And I
Right.
just think that it is great to step back every once in a while and say that, especially as indie authors, we are the not only the creative directors, but the CEOs and the CFOs for our own businesses in most cases. And I think even traditionally published authors are having to take on sort of more of the financial oversight or management of their work than maybe they did in the past. So we're going to go back to basics and we're going to be talking about the top 5 bookkeeping tips for authors. And so, Mike, you were kind enough to send me what some of these tips are. And I love your first one, which is to treat your writing like a business from day one. Talk a
Absolutely.
bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. So, certainly the IRS sees you as a business. And so, as an author or any sort of independent business person, be it creative or otherwise, you should see yourself that way as well. I think the number one thing I see with people just starting out, whether it's starting a business or some creative endeavor, is they fail to set up a business related checking account or business related bank accounts. And this really causes problems when you start, you're starting to see some income from your efforts. And that information is getting commingled with the groceries you purchased last week or the new air filter you put in the car. It's really important to keep those things separate. Obviously, it simplifies things like taxes when you get to that point. It protects the various business deductions that you may have. But most importantly, it really gives you visibility into how your business is performing, how you're growing, where you're spending your money on your business. Again, separate from the groceries or the air filter. And it gives you that visibility and that clarity that you need in order to really run a business. And the whole idea is having that financial clarity then gives you the creative freedom to do the things you love to do, you need to do in order to grow your writing business.
And I suppose that first step of setting up a separate checking account, for example, it's not dependent on, for example, creating an LLC or all the more organizational things. Like you can just go in and tell your bank you want a separate bank account, right? It doesn't require a separate legal entity.
Yeah, a lot of times it depends on usually your town. An LLC is set up at your state level, but they're not necessarily required in order to set up that separate account. One thing I will sort of suggest is certainly start with the bank where you do your personal banking and see what their options are in terms of business accounts. But a lot of times, larger banks will have, deposit minimums or monthly fees on business checking accounts. So be sure to check out some of the options that are available, some of the newer online banks, which are growing in size and growing in popularity. Things like Relay or Bluevine are great options for handling that in a no cost, no fee way. At a time, again, if you're starting out, you may not really have a lot of money to put into a bank. You may not be able to meet a $2,000 or $5,000 minimum balance. That's money you could be investing in your business. So keep an eye out for those options and do what's best for your situation.
And if someone is very early in their author career and let's say they've only had expenses so far, they're working on their first book,
Sure.
you've had to pay out money for an editor, you've had to pay out money for a cover design, whatever those things might be. How would you recommend that? Like right from the get-go, do you see that separate account with, the owner investment with some amount of owner investment and
Yep.
just label it as such?
Yep. No, absolutely. You've obviously done this before, Maddie. No, absolutely. That initial investment into your writing, into your business would be categorized as an owner's investment. And that's sort of that initial seed money where you would then, pay for different software subscriptions for your writing and editing capabilities. And that's certainly how you would start.
One of the things that, as someone who's just awful at finances, I finally made enough money that I hired someone. And if I had known that um, Bassick Insights Bookkeeping was available way back then, I would have come to you. But it's a very good friend of mine who I'd known for many years, and finally talked her into to taking on my finances. And one of the things that was very illuminating for me was, I mean, I already had the separate checking account and all that kind of thing and
Mhm.
the LLC set up, but I hadn't done a good job of categorizing my expenses. And when you
Ah,
mentioned subscriptions, like tech subscriptions, for example, it made me think of it because I was shocked at how much money my tech subscriptions cost. And
yeah.
and I'm very diligent about tracking my subscriptions. Like, I'm not somebody who has like a million streaming services and things like that. I'm very careful about it. I have a list of all my subscriptions. I turn them on and off as possible. But nonetheless, it was eye-opening to me to see how much of the money I earned goes to subscriptions. Do you have suggestions for like how people should go about getting that sort of category perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this isn't a discussion about spreadsheets or software. It's about clarity, control, confidence in where you stand financially. So there are certainly different options out there in terms of bookkeeping and accounting platforms like QuickBooks or Xero, some of those sorts of things. There are spreadsheets you can put together. What I would recommend to people is, as you're just starting out, start with what works for you and what feels comfortable. And don't be afraid to ask for help. If it's something that just feels overwhelming, there are there are all sorts of resources out there. I, I think I've talked to you about your bookkeeper before, and I've said, if you find a bookkeeper that you like and that works with you, hold on to them with both hands because they could be tremendously valuable to your business. But start out with what works for you, what feels comfortable, and I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm a bookkeeper. I'm a financial advisor and strategist for businesses. And I'm diligent about keeping my own books. But there are times when I go in and look at the end of the month or the end of the quarter. And when you see it all put together, there's that moment of clarity where you say, wow, I'm spending how much on my subscriptions? Do I really need that software package? So no matter where you are, what stage you are, it's great to have that kind of clarity.
Yeah. Yeah, my trusty business manager does all the categorization in QuickBooks. I got QuickBooks many years ago because
Mhm.
I thought, ha, that because it was QuickBooks, there would be like lots of resources to ask questions about. And it's QuickBooks, so they have it all ironed out, right? I found that wasn't necessarily the case. It turns out
Yeah.
QuickBooks is kind of a mess. And now I feel like I'm stuck because we've done so much stuff in QuickBooks to get everything under control. And I'm not asking for specific recommendations from you, although, of course, if you have recommendations, that would be great. But if
Mhm.
people are just thinking about going to some kind of software to help them manage their finances, can you suggest some of the things that they should take into account? Like if they're doing a search for best bookkeeping software for something, what are some of the parameters they should think about to make sure that they're getting something that's right for what they need?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I like to recommend to people is step back from thinking about this spreadsheet or this software package before you even start thinking about that. Think about, how do I run my business? How do I want to run my business? What are the things that I would need potentially a software package to help me with? And start thinking about, in bookkeeping and accounting, we talk about the chart of accounts. And that's really the set of accounts where you are categorizing the different transactions. So, how would I organize the types of expenses that I have? We've talked about software subscriptions. That's certainly a category. Editing services that you might need for your business,
Mhm.
book cover design work, those sorts of things. Those are different ways to think about the categories of expenses in your business. And then starting from there, you can start to think about, what are the types of features and capabilities that I need in a software package or in a solution that I can start searching for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that on top of the categorization, which is, something I do appreciate about having official bookkeeping software, because
Mhm.
I've tried to do it for many years in spreadsheets, and that was problematic too, is the idea of being able to more clearly see the expenses and the income related to a certain thing. So for me, oftentimes that's like an author conference. So
Mhm.
if I'm going and I'm doing a speaking engagement, I'm getting paid for the speaking engagement, and maybe I'm getting, my hotel comped, but I'm not getting my travel comped or something like that. Like, it's been very helpful to me to say, you can get a check for a speaking engagement or something like that. And, that seems really good. But then when you hold it up against what are the expenses of taking advantage of that opportunity, did it turn
Was
out
it, was it
in a,
worth it?
yes, was
Was
it
it
worth
worth
it?
it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that sort of leads into tip number 2, which is really looking at all of your potential income sources and tracking them in specific categories, not just lumping them all in as income. Because to your point, you want to be able to see, how am I doing on book sales? How am I doing on speaking engagements, courses that I'm teaching, freelance writing, Patreon, whatever it might be, even interest earned on your savings account, right? You want to kind of keep that separate so you can really see category by category. How is my business growing? Where am I most profitable? And where does it make sense to start to put my efforts in order to grow this endeavor, in order to grow this business?
Do you have any advice from a bookkeeping point of view about calculating ROI for certain endeavors? A really common one that I always think about is audiobooks.
Mhm.
So I love being able to tell people that I offer my books in ebook and print and audio. And audio is expensive. And I think in many cases, in many of my books, I've not yet earned back the money that I spent on getting the audiobook produced. But I feel as if eventually I will. I mean, I paid however much to get the audiobook produced, and now people are going to be buying it forever. And at some point, I feel confident I'm going to earn my money back. When people are trying to make those kinds of assessments, do you have advice about how they should think of that? Like the time frames they should be thinking about it, how much is a good investment, how much is throwing your money away? Any advice on that front?
Yeah. So if we go with that scenario, the audiobook, really looking at it and saying, what's the overall cost for getting this produced and out and available in the marketplace? And then, quite simply, how many of these am I going to need to sell in order to break even? Right. And then what's your plan for promoting that audiobook in order to reach those sales? And again, those promotions are promotional costs
Yeah.
that need to factor into it. And then it's really there's obviously value in sort of the marketing, advertising aspect of it that I think an author would need to take into account in any given situation. So, for example, you're producing audiobook versions of your books. There are social media posts you can do around that. There's different sort of campaigns you can do that help promote the book as a whole, not just the audiobook.
Hmm.
They help promote your brand, contribute to a social media presence, those sorts of things. So those are sort of the intangibles that I think everybody should take into account. These types of activities are not all about dollars and cents every time. There are other factors to consider when you're looking at those types of ROI calculations.
Yeah, that's especially tough for expenses that are like, platform building or whatever for authors that like I'm boosting posts on Facebook, for example, and I'm doing
Mhm.
that because I want to make sure that those posts are reaching my audience. I mean, a great example of this is my post about podcast episodes that I'm improving the chances that they actually see a post about one of my
Right.
guests or the episode or whatever it is. And so often I'll boost it for like $1. And I'm never going to be able to match that dollar that I spent to boost the post against any kind of benefit like,
Sure.
"Oh, I boosted it here, and then I got a patron for $5 a month," or something like that. Can you advise a little bit more about, like, the mindset people should bring to those things where there isn't a clear assignment of the benefit of that cost?
Yeah, I think those types of more, I'll call them general promotion, general advertising expenses or expenditures that new business owners in general need to think about. At the start, that can sort of be a lot of trial and error, if you will, kind of seeing what works. And what works for one author may or may not work for another author. So it's great to kind of reach out to your community and find out what's working for folks and try some of those things. But I've found, for me as a business owner and business owners that I work with, there's no set formula for landscaping companies or locksmiths, or, in this case, those in the creative endeavors, that's going to work for everyone. So, in those cases, try some things, see what works. Make sure you are tracking those in terms of your financials. You're sort of tracking those separate from the ROI of a given project. They're more sort of general brand building, general awareness for the business. So you're keeping those separate from those ROI calculations.
That idea that you had introduced about the time one spends on social media, building up a followership or what have you, also makes me think about the idea of accounting for time. So whenever I talk to anybody, whenever I do a presentation on indie publishing and I say, like, let's say I'm talking about pursuing your own placement in podcast as a podcast guest, for example,
Mm-hmm.
do you want to pay someone to do that or do you want to do it yourself? And I have
Right.
reasons beyond financial ones that I think it's better to try to do it yourself, at least initially. But I always say that everyone should also be accounting for their time. Like anything you're
Yes.
doing, you should not be saying, well, it was free because all I had to do was invest my time in it.
Right.
How do you recommend people think about that? Is there a way that they can think about that in a more objective, sort of financially
Yeah.
stringent way?
Yeah. So for me personally, I think about what's my hourly rate, and a lot goes into that, but it's also, what do I think I'm worth? And, a big part of that also is recognizing the things that you're good at, the things that you enjoy doing, and being willing to say, I know I am not good at social media advertising, for example. And so I'm willing to farm that out to somebody else and have them handle that for me, as part of that being very clear in terms of the end result you're looking to get from that, right? Doing something, because it's free and just investing your own time and spending 10 hours doing it. Okay. There's value in the learning, right? In trying that and seeing what the results are, kind of getting that knowledge. But if you're going to farm something out, definitely be very clear with yourself. What are the end goals I'm trying to reach here? Because, that's money coming out of your business where you're looking for a specific result.
Yeah, one of the things that I finally just had to come to terms with is that there are certain things that I know if I were only assessing it on a financial ROI basis, I would not be able to justify it, but I just enjoy doing it. So I do it anyway. And I just chalk it up to
Sure.
like hobby time, like I'm not looking for a big financial payoff. I'm like, I like playing in Canva to do something. And could I get it done faster if I hired someone on Fiverr? Yes, I could. Would I miss doing it? Yes, I would. So,
That's a
just
very
go into
important.
it with the right expectation about what
Yeah.
you're going to get out of it.
Yeah. That's a very important aspect to consider, like we are saying. So absolutely
Yeah.
enjoy your time in Canva for sure.
Yes, exactly. Just to go from sort of more strategic to more specific, one of your tips is know what to deduct and keep proof. So
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So when that time of year comes, when tax time comes around, it's really important to have your expenses correctly categorized. So, you have appropriate deductions from your income and you have that accurate picture of how your business performed that year. It's also important just from running your business, as we've talked about, looking at your financials at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, and not being surprised what you're spending on your software subscriptions, ISBNs, ads, coaching, whatever it might be. It's important to have all that information. I tell people, keep receipts. A lot of receipts come digital, attached to an email these days. Just keep track of those. Very easy thing to do if you get a paper receipt is just snap a picture of it with your phone. That way you have it digitally. You can kind of keep all those things in one file on your computer, and you have those sort of as your backup when tax time comes.
Another piece of advice you have, another tip is review your financials quarterly, not just at tax time.
Absolutely.
So if
Absolutely.
someone is looking at their financials quarterly, what kind of information should they be looking for? What should they be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think it's, at a basic level, it's what we've been talking about. It's How are you doing in terms of your income? How are you doing in terms of your expenses? Obviously, the first year, 2 years of starting any new business venture, expenses can be outpacing income. That's understandable, but sort of know what your runway is in terms of the cash you have on hand in terms of the investment you've made as the owner in the business. How long can that investment last you at the rate that you're spending money on the business compared to any income you may have coming in early? It's also a great time to start looking at trends month over month, quarter over quarter. How are those expenses tracking? Where is your income growing? Again, we talked about those categories in terms of writing, different appearances, whatever it might be. It's a great time to start looking at how that's starting to shift over time. And I have a few business owners that I work with that just absolutely hate financial reports. To them, it's just black ink on a white page. And, like, Mike, I don't want to have to read this. Just tell me what's going on. And so depending on what works best for you and what your interest is, it could be simple financial reports. It could be simple charts and dashboards that you put together that pull that information in and show a bar graph or a line graph or something that really helps the information pop and makes it very clear what those trends look like. And those are pretty easy to put together in something like Google Sheets. So those, as I said, sort of really help look at those trends over time and how your business is growing and changing over that time. Those quarterly reviews really help you also look for any seasonal swings that you may have in your business. And if, for example, you're putting out a new book every year, that's great. Your income's going to spike at certain times in the year, and then income's going to drop off. So what does that look like? And how do you plan for those different swings throughout the year?
Yeah, I think that as with so many things, explaining things to someone else is so useful. And it's very tricky. We're going to get in a moment when you want professional help, but I'm thinking of when you want amateur help. And one of the things that I found so useful in working with my friend who became my business manager is
Mhm.
having to explain things to her. She does not have background in the indie author space.
Sure.
Her background is finance. And so, I would just be explaining to her some of the mechanics of indie publishing. But oftentimes in the process of explaining things, I would sort of talk myself into a more logical decision. So, for example, when I started seeing if I was paid for a virtual talk and I was only, air quotes, investing time to get that, and it was a relatively, modest amount of time that I was doing, then that was very profitable. Whereas if I was traveling somewhere, I almost always ended up losing money because,
Right.
just a plane ticket, the plane ticket, it's
Yeah.
on its own would eat into the profit. And so it made me readjust my strategy to focus on virtual events rather than in-person events, unless they were really doing like a full ride. Yeah, we're going to cover everything. But
Mhm.
even then, it never covers everything. There's always like,
It's
you
always
have to
something.
buy mouthwash at the drugstore
Right.
while you're there, and it's 5 times as much as it would be at home, and no one's gonna cover that.
That's right.
Um, but even if in that case, I was talking about it with my business manager who had all my financials right there in front of her, but even if it wasn't specific like that, I think that finding someone that you can talk through those things with someone, even at a general sense, if you can find someone you trust like that, it can be very illuminating and helpful because having to explain it to someone else sometimes makes you say, yeah, that doesn't really make any sense. Or, yeah, that totally makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And just in terms of when I started my business, just talking with people who had their own businesses, things I hadn't even thought about, just kind of coming out in conversation, and there's tremendous value in that. So absolutely, whether it's in terms of, tracking your financials, working with a professional, somebody that somebody that you trust to get their advice, or as we've said, even within your author community, people who have sort of been through those trials and tribulations already. It's a great opportunity to learn from them and hopefully avoid some of the pitfalls that they fell into along the way. Yeah.
So that's great advice for kind of like powwowing with one's colleagues and friends. But what is a sign that somebody should really be getting more professional help with their bookkeeping in their indie author business or even with their just author business in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's something that you just absolutely dread thinking about, if it's something that just, you know, your mind doesn't work that way, and it feels like drudgery to have to start tracking your expenses and sort of thinking about how all of this fits together and how should I do this, then that's a pretty good sign. You should look for some help. You don't need to become a bookkeeper as a small business owner or as an independent author. You are looking to focus on your creative endeavor, and that's where you should focus your energy. As soon as bookkeeping becomes a stressor or it distracts from your writing, that's a great sign that it's time to go looking for some help. If you can find someone who either understands sort of the creative side of business or who can easily sort of absorb from you those aspects of your business and what's important to you, and they can offer you insights, not just sort of spit back reports to you. They can really offer you insights into what's going on in your business. Then again, that's somebody valuable to you in your business. Grab on, hold on to them with both hands.
Yeah, I think on top of assigning value to one's time, we should all assign value to the aggravation level because I would just, as soon as I
Absolutely.
started trying to do anything like that, I would just get angry and frustrated. And then I was like shot for any creative work for the rest of the day.
Absolutely.
So,
Well,
yeah, there's
so
an actual price to pay for that.
yeah, and the key word used there is value, right? I think a lot of people look at whether it's bookkeeping or other business services, and they look at it and they say, oh, it's this much an hour or this much a month or whatever that dollar number is. And those dollar numbers, you look at them, especially when you're starting out, and you kind of say, that's more than I can afford. But when you step back and you look at what's the value that you're getting from that service in exchange for those dollars, how is that going to help you grow your business, right? And bookkeeping it's one of those things that can be a growth tool for an author, for any new business. This is a different kind of books. You want
That's
to focus on one kind of books, let somebody else focus on the other. Yes.
keeping.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So fun. Well, Mike, it is always lovely to talk with you. And please let everyone know who they can find out more about you and your services and everything you do online.
Sure, absolutely. So folks can visit me at Bassick Insights, Bassick insights.com. Lots of information there to help folks. If you're interested, book a free 30-minute discovery call. I'm happy to talk to any of your viewers and listeners about sort of their financial journey as part of their creative endeavors. And yeah, I absolutely loved speaking with you and, look forward to many more opportunities like this.
Excellent. Thank you.